Arizona Hispanic Connection.
Welcome to AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection for another very special show. And I really mean it. We have a special show today. The subject is Author Al Quihuis, Better Than Me. The subject again, Author Al Quihuis, Better Than Me. And I'll come back to the subject and we'll get into it. But before I do, let me remind you that this show is being Facebook Lived. So if you do Facebook, you're driving, you're at home, whatever you're listening by radio, please, when you have a chance, look for our page and find it, follow it, and share it. It is very important for us to know who's out there, who's listening, who's following, and it's very, very important. So I'm asking if you wouldn't mind doing that. And now again, the subject, Author Al Quihuis, Better Than Me. And let me say a little something about the show today before I introduce my guest. I got a hold of this book. It's called Better Than Me, and the author is Al Quihuis, and I read it. I read the whole book, and it's, even though I'm a male, and primarily this is the story of three females, it's unbelievable how, in essence, there is an experience in this book that I believe thousands, if not millions, of people can relate to. So we're going to get into this amazing book. It's called Better Than Me. If I remember right, these are words that a mother told a daughter. Correct?
Correct.
And the daughter that these words were told to is here with us. The mother told the daughter something in the line of, "You have to be better than me," or something along those lines. So we'll get to that book. And the book is called Better Than Me: 3 Generations of Inner Strength. 3 generations of inner strength. And I love the cover because it has a little girl and then the mother, and I have to believe the other one is the grandma.
The grandmother's in the middle.
Oh, the grandma is in the middle.
And that's my mother on the one side, and
then you
me as a little girl.
Right. And it's interesting because the person of whom this book is about is not the author. so they took your story, and then Al Quihuis, who is an author, who is a writer, wrote the story. So let me introduce my guest, and then we'll get into this book. But more than that, the story and some very, very good conversation that we're going to be getting into. So let me just briefly say that, again, the author is Al Quihuis. The topic of this show is Author Al Quihuis, Better Than Me, 3 Generations of Inner Strength. And our guest is obviously Al Quihuis, the author, and then Veronica Eakins Lamanes. Veronica Eakins Lamanes. Even your last names is a story in itself, Veronica. First of all, thank you so much, Veronica, for joining our show today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, when I saw you in the hallway, I said, I feel like you're my sister. I feel like I know you, because when I read this book, again, even though I'm a male, and this relates to a grandma, a mother, and a daughter, the story is just unbelievable. So thank you.
I could use another brother.
Yes, why not? And Al, thank you so much. If you can speak close to the mic, that would be great. Sure. You and I have been, first of all, I want to thank you. You've been so supportive of my work with AARP, the radio show. I've taken some good advice from you. And eventually I learned that you're an author, that you write books. And then you gave me this book and I read it. And it's interesting because I read your speech, Veronica, that you gave at, what was
graduation.
It called? What's the name of the high school?
Ajo High School.
Ajo High School. I read your speech to my wife and my son. I read it out loud, and I was full of excitement. It was unbelievable. So, Al, thank you very much for being with us in this show. Thank you very much for writing this book. I really hope that many will get to read it. Welcome again.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Perfect. Okay, so let me set the stage a little bit, and then I'll throw in some questions to both of you. The protagonist is Veronica Eakins, and then of coming of age, right? So it deals with your experience coming of age, and then also Maria, your mother, and then Manuela, your grandmother. So that's basically the story of 3 women. Am I correct?
Correct.
Perfect. And then the theme is follow your dreams. Sacrifices to better your children's life is universal. I say it again. Follow your dreams, and sacrifices to better your children's life is universal. This is an amazing statement because it is so true. Did you come up with that one, Al? Or who did?
No, a lot. We had received a lot of comments, a lot of reviews, and they all echoed the same thing. And I was given a speech at Mesa Community College. It was part of the Living Library, and I was the living book. And I spoke, and I told them about this book that I had coming, and I shared the story about the inner strength of three women and why the sacrifices that they were making, so the next generation could have a better life. And there were several people, and especially one from the Middle East, and she says, that's why I'm here today. That's why I've sacrificed so much, because of my kids.
Right.
I want them to have a better life. So
Right.
You're exactly right. It is universal.
And it's interesting, Veronica, because a lot of times we applaud and we congratulate the person that got the master's degree, the PhD, and it should. But then there's the mother, then there's the grandma at a place where maybe it's unseen, behind the scenes doing pretty much the main work of raising a person. And I just saw the story, your mother, your grandma. It is unbelievable. We're going to get to it. We're going to get to it and I'm going to ask you questions. I'm just looking at the clock, and we're going to be having to do a short break right now. But we'll come back again. Remember, this topic is Author Al Quihuis, Better Than Me. It's a book, and we're going to get to the book. The person who this book is about is here with us. And then the writer who wrote the book about Veronica is here with us today. So thank you very much to both of you. Welcome again. Thank you for joining. We're going to take a short break. Stay with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP Arizona Hispanic Connection. Amazing subject today. It's about the life of literally a grandma, a mother, and a daughter. It's just amazing. So let me start asking some questions to both of you. Let me start with you, Al. How did you get started writing this book? What motivated you? I mean, I'm sure that you learned about the history or the story of Veronica, and you got the inspiration to do it. How did it happen?
Yes. Veronica's not shy about telling her stories about all her little episodes as growing up, and I just found them very entertaining, and I watched as she shared them with her friends, and they were just like they were amused and amazed of the life that she had experienced. And I said, as I tell many people, you need to write this down, because if you don't share this, you don't write it down, it'll be lost forever. And so I kept on encouraging her, and the one day I thought, you know what, I'm going to help her get started. And so I started writing. And as time went on, I realized I was writing the whole story, all of her stories. and that's how it started.
Right.
You know.
So tell us about the main thing that you felt was the essence of what you wanted to convey in this book.
Right. Yeah. So there's so many things about this book that I really felt that it was. Matter of fact, if you don't mind, I'm going to
Not
read
a
this
problem.
real quick. I write about what people say, like, what is this book about? Well, this is an inspirational historical memoir. Has a bit of everything: betrayal, escaping into the night, poverty, a Mexican princess, ghost stories, pirates, a dance marathon, murder, a brothel, bullies, culture, tradition, survival, education, love of family, learning a new language, and the Mexican Revolution. And of
Wow.
course, Pancho Villa.
Yeah.
And so I just realized there's so much of this story, and I really feel if it's put together, it is a story that needs to be told and shared with everyone.
Right. And Veronica, I'm just it's interesting that if someone was to see you on the street, just, walking around, driving around, look at you, they probably would have no idea about your story, honestly. Did I understand right that your grandparents, or at least from your dad's side, were from Spain?
Hmm. That's correct.
So your grandparents Spaniards, and then your dad was Mexican, and that now you.
Correct.
So, what I would like to ask you is what major challenges did your grandma and mother experience, and because again that's the story, right? Can you share a little bit about that story that you experienced with mom and grandma?
Well, grandma, as the book mentions, my grandmother had such a difficult life as well. She was born in Baja California. They moved from Baja to Guaymas first when she was just a young teenage girl. And then from there, they made the trek to the border. It was during the time of the revolution that Al is talking about, during Pancho Villa. And so they went from Guaymas all the way to Agua Prieta and that border there in horse and carriage, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And, they had to travel through the desert and everything else there. They had to worry about, the Indians at the time. So when she finally made it there, her challenge was, again, to learn English, because they were right at the border. She got a job in Arizona, working in Douglas. I think she was working at J.C. Penney's at the time. And so she had to learn the language. So her, that was her challenge. Marries my grandfather, who was a widow already. He was a widower at the time when she met him, and he had kids. So her challenge was to learn the ranch, the farm, that kind of life.
Your grandpa was Anglo-Saxon.
He was
correct?
Anglo-Saxon, yes.
Anglo-Saxon.
Yes.
So an Anglo-Saxon gentleman
married a Mexican. Yes, a little Mexican lady from Baja.
Okay. Was she short?
She was short, and he was like 6'4" or something like that. They made quite a
Interesting. So your grandpa, of whom you get Eakins, the
correct.
last name Eakins, he lost the wife. And
He
then
lost the
found
wife.
Your grandma,
Yes.
Manuela,
Mhm.
and they got married.
Yes.
Now they live in. So now just a little something here. So crossing the border, then you mentioned Douglas, was simple.
It was at the time, from what I understand. From what I think, if you got the job, I don't know if you got sponsored. I'm not exactly sure how she was already a legal U.S. resident when she met grandfather. When she met Robert Eakins, who was my grandfather. And then they moved to New Mexico, where they had a ranch. Mm-hmm. She had started having children because she married kind of late in life. Mm-hmm. She was already, older for in those days, for a woman to get married, and had her children one right after the other while living at the ranch. So she had the challenge of, learning that. And then, it wasn't long after, they weren't married that long, when she was pregnant with her last child, my aunt, when my grandfather was shot. Right. While riding his horse. So she found, again, she went back to Mexico, because at that time there was any kind of social assistance here in the U.S. And she was lured by her sister at the time to just come back to Mexico. You have family here. So she went, with 5 and little ones and 1 in the way.
And at that point, obviously, your mother is one of those.
So my mother was one of them.
Maria.
She was the second one.
The
Second one. And
what part of Mexico did they go back
so they
to?
went to Naco, Sonora.
Okay.
Naco, Sonora, and that's where they grew up. And my mother was 4 years old when they went back to Mexico, and she did not speak Spanish. No, they spoke, because in those days, my grandmother says you spoke the language that your father
so your mother
spoke.
Maria spoke English first.
First, they all
Interesting.
spoke English, correct.
Interesting.
And then, of course, as she grew up in Mexico, she forgot her English because she had to go to school there in
I know
Mexico.
you do not touch this point in the book, Al, but what do you think your grandpa saw in your grandma to ask her to marry him?
That was in, my grandmother had quite a, she had quite a sense of humor. And I think he did too. And he came into the store to buy things for the ranch.
Okay.
And that's how he met her. And they started, talking, and he would ask her questions. I think Al mentions a little bit about how that happened, wanting her, do you know how to cook? Do you know how to do these things? And she said, yes, I do. I can challenge you to that. So, and his kids, I think, were already, grown too. So she didn't have to raise his kids, at that time. So. But there was definitely an attraction, and he was the love of her life. She was a young woman when she became a widow, and never, remarried. She dedicated the rest of her life. She died when she was about 83.
Right.
She dedicated the rest of her life to her children and her grandchildren.
So Manuela, your grandma, her family, did they kind of live in the Sonora area?
Correct.
Okay.
They did.
Is there anything that in the writing of this book, right, that you learn, something that just in almost like digging deeper, right, digging deeper into the story? Is there anything, or what is it that you found out more that you did not know or were not aware of before?
Well, I was a little girl. I was 9 years old when my grandmother died. But in the research that Al did, in getting this book completed, he talked to many people, interviewed my older siblings, other family members, friends, and I, what I learned is that I did not realize just the strength, just how strong my grandmother was. To have to be a single woman in those years.
Right.
Raising a family of 6 kids all on her own.
Wow.
And so I was in awe and admiration about her again. I always knew she was a very intelligent woman. By the way, but when she died, she was 83 years old. She spoke fluent English to the day she died, and always encouraged us, myself and my other sister, the one that's right before me, to learn another language, to learn English. And both of us would say, why? Why do we need to learn another language? We were living in Mexico at the
time. Do you
time.
attribute your experience, quote unquote, success? We always want people to be successful, right?
Yeah.
To that experience of your grandma with the 2 cultures already early on, the 2 languages.
Exactly.
And that nuance of culture and language. Do you attribute that to kind of inheriting those elements to your own experience?
Absolutely. She really encouraged us to embrace other languages and education. She was really, really big on education. She was such a smart lady. She used to help me with my homework in Mexico when I went to school in Mexico. She was wonderful with, she was very smart with math and writing. She just knew how to express herself so well. And she was not an educated woman. I really don't know how far along in those days. I think if you got to 6th grade, you were lucky,
right,
to have made it that far.
My mom didn't go to school.
Yeah.
My dad went all the way to only to 3rd grade. Yeah. Another question, in the story, in the book, it is obvious that the father figure was not necessarily there.
No, and it's interesting because, when we talk about history repeating itself, my mother and her siblings grew up without a father. And then my siblings, my 3 siblings from my mother's first marriage, they grew up without a father. And then I basically grew up without a father. So we never had that father figure in our lives. And that was something, again, we had those strong women.
Right,
and that was the only thing that we could relate to.
Right.
I never really missed having a father.
Right.
And it was not until, I got to university that I could see my friends, fathers coming to visit. And I thought that was something
Yeah.
different.
And Al, we have a couple more minutes before we go on our next break. Please talk to us about that inner strength of women that they're just the source of so much of the success of the children. But a lot of the times we're not that aware. We don't highlight that enough.
Right. Yeah. Kind of getting back to like her grandmother, when she came back to the States or came back to Mexico in Naco, she put all of her money into a Bisbee bank, and then she went back to get the money, and it turned out that was during the time of the Depression, and when she went back, the bank was closed.
Mm.
So this woman had to be incredible to persevere and to make sure that her kids had the best of everything, as best as she could. Her mother, Maria, also at the same time, when she got married and her husband betrayed her. She ended up having to go to Los Angeles,
Right.
the job as a seamstress there. Meanwhile,
Costurera? Is that how?
Costurera.
Yeah, costurera. Mm-hmm.
And meanwhile, her mother continues to take care of the kids and sacrifice so she could have a better life, so she could give her kids a better life.
Mm.
I mean, talk about inner strength. It's incredible. And
Right.
so, once again, the book has many examples of these women persevering and giving of themselves completely.
Yeah, one of the things that it kind of amazes me is that it's in English. So you're reading about Empalme, Puerto Peñasco. You go back to Naco, and you're mentioning Hermosillo and all the Guaymas and all these names, but you're writing the book in English. So I understand that you look into translating it perhaps into Spanish.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, this
Yes.
book has to be translated.
Yes,
It is just
I agree.
unbelievable.
I want to read something to you.
Yeah.
I got a minute or two?
You have just a few seconds here, unless you want to do it when we come back.
When we come back.
Okay, let's do it when we come back. Stay with us. We're going to take another short break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. The subject today, Author Al Quihuis, Better Than Me. We'll be right back. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Let me remind you again, if you do Facebook, please find our page, follow our page, and share our page. It's very, very important to us. We don't know who's listening by radio. We don't have the numbers, but if you follow us on Facebook, we will definitely know. If you leave a comment, if you have a question, you can always reach out to us through Facebook. The page again is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. Al, you wanted to read something. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. You were asking about being the culture and tradition of Mexico, and then also being in English. So I just want to, as far as the purpose of the book, I want to read these to you very quickly. The people of Mexican descent will be able to identify with the culture, tradition, history, details, and folklore about life in Mexico. I wanted to highlight the challenges of coming to a new country, learning a new language, and the prejudice of assimilating into a new culture.
Wow.
I hope that people with Mexican roots will find a reflection of challenges confronted and victories won by their own family. Many readers will glimpse for the first time the lifestyle in Mexico. I attended a book club where everybody was Anglo, and this is really for them to see the challenge of everyday life there, of moving across the border, learning a new language and assimilating into a new community. And I hope people who have a contact or knowledge with Mexican Americans and their stories will gain numerous insight and appreciation through the experience of one family.
Definitely, definitely. Let me come back to you, Veronica. Let's now talk a little bit about your mother. In reading the life of your mother, I am telling you, she went through a lot. Can you relate? Okay, so she got married, and then had 3 kids, and that didn't work out.
Correct.
And then he met your dad, Ramon.
Correct.
And then they had you, and that didn't work out either. The marriage was, what's the word? Fake?
It was a sham wedding.
Yeah,
yes, yes.
And your mother, she was in love. She was happy, and all of a sudden, the
Again.
gentleman had continued with the current marriage.
Correct.
So basically, he was already married, and he just went on with that marriage.
Yes.
So your impressions about what your mother had to go through, and then if you can tell us to the point where she uttered these words to you.
Yes, yeah. Obviously, yes. My mother had a very difficult life, beginning from she got married very young. She was very happy. She was happily married, had 3 children, and that didn't work. As you said, the marriage just did not. It failed for them. So my mother ended up having to leave her 3 small children and go to California, where her brothers were. Her older brothers were living there. And she made a living there for like the next 10 years in order to support them. And she left the 3 kids with my grandmother, Manuela, at the time, who was already an elderly person.
Right.
But she was helping my mother so that my mother could help them. She went to LA, and I remember my mother telling me stories. She says, those were the worst 10 years of her life, because there were times when she could only see her kids once a year. If she was lucky, maybe twice a year.
Right.
And so, that created all kinds of problems, I'm sure, for my siblings who never saw my mother. Their grandmother was really the mother who raised them for all those years. When she came back back to Mexico to see them, that's when she met my father. She came back from LA. She thought they had gotten married. I was born in 1960 in Empalme, Sonora, but we were living in Santa Ana at the time,
Right.
and we were there for 4 years, just short of 4 years. When again, he decides to go back to his wife. Actually, that's when my mother, I guess, found out that it was a sham wedding.
Right.
Of course, I didn't know any of this. And from that point, we had to leave in the middle of the night, like Al mentions in the book, because they were creditors that were after my mother, and we were living we had a nice lifestyle when we lived there with my father. And we moved to Puerto Peñasco, where my teenage brother at the time was working in the shrimp boats and the fishing boats and that. So we moved to Peñasco. She takes the whole family there. And when we get to Peñasco, there's challenges there.
That was a whole ordeal to
get
make
there.
the trip from Santa Ana to Peñasco. I
Peñasco,
remember
yes.
reading
Oh,
that.
yes, yeah.
The heat.
The heat.
Do you know the
and
month?
with the
Remember
middle
what
of the
month that
night.
was?
Yeah. Oh, it was in the summer
It was
months.
quite an ordeal. Yeah.
Crossing the desert.
Wow.
And to me, it was an adventure, because I was just a little girl, and where am I going? But my siblings were teenage kids. They were young. They were just, where are you bringing us, Mom? There was no running water. There was no electricity in Rocky Point at the time. And we lived with my mom's cousin for like 3 months until my mother could find a place to rent, and there weren't that many in that little town. So that was, again, challenges. What was she going to do? All my siblings were able to get a job. My mother started sewing. The word of mouth got out there that she was a seamstress, and she was wonderful at it. She was great at. That was a great skill that she had. My father had given her a Singer sewing machine when I was born, and so that was one thing that saved her. She says,
Right.
that's going to be my
foot pedal.
livelihood.
We
the
used to
foot
call
pedal
it
singer.
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 La
Singer.
singer.
Sí. And so that's how she supported us in Rocky Point. She started to get a reputation of being a really good seamstress. And everyone would come to my mother to get their wedding dresses, quinceañera dresses, the uniforms for the schools,
Wow.
whatever. She would get it done.
But she worked hard.
She worked
I
hard.
read
She
on
worked,
the book that she worked
and there was
like
no
many
electricity, so she
hours
worked
a day.
with a kerosene lamp, at night.
mhm.
And so we all lived together. My grandmother was with us.
Right.
When we got to Rocky Point, that's why I love the cover of the book, because that is the day that we went to the ocean, to the beach. My grandmother had not been back to the ocean for almost, 50 years.
Wow.
And so when we take her there, she's already blind, but she can feel the breeze and she can hear the ocean. And she says, "Aquí me quiero morir. This is where I want to die."
Wow.
And so my mom and I are holding her hand as we're walking her along
so
the
this
beach.
is a true story.
That's a
so
true
to
story
speak.
right there.
It
That's Rocky
actually
Point. That's
happened.
the mountain in the background.
That's a
Wow.
Yes.
scene in her life.
Yes.
That's amazing.
Yes. And so, I definitely got my strength from both of these women, my grandmother Manuela, my mother Maria. When we came to the States, that was a challenge, for me. I resisted as much as a 9-year-old can resist trying to come to the United States. I didn't want to come. I didn't see why I needed to come.
Take us through what happened with these words, and actually that's the title of the book.
Better Than Me became such a powerful thing for me. When I turned 14, I became a U.S. citizen. And my mother was with me when we went to the court in Tucson.
And let's mention also that at that point your father was totally out of the picture.
He was totally out of the
but
picture.
it was necessary for him to be there.
Correct.
So as a requirement for you to become a U.S. citizen, so you had to go look for him.
We found him,
Right.
in Agua Prieta,
Right.
much through friends, and he said, yes, I will go ahead and sign my name over, although I hadn't been using his last name already. But legally, the states require that.
Right.
The immigration require that. And so he says, but I want to meet her. So that was the only time that I ever met my father. And I was almost 14 at the time. And from that point on, we stayed in touch via letters and phone calls and that. And then I'd like to talk a little bit about later how he affected me, really, with what he had, the impression, that I took from him. And he helped me to better myself in regards to learning Spanish and speaking Spanish and not forgetting it. He was a professor and he was very good at it. So when we went to immigration, I'm translating, I'm interpreting for my mother.
Right.
In those days, they didn't have interpreters, and I'm interpreting for my mother. And
So by that time, you knew English?
Oh yes,
Okay.
yes. I was 14. I came to
Got
the
it.
States just when I turned 10. So it'd been 4 years.
That's right. You have been already
Yes.
in school. We'll get to that.
Correct. Yes.
Her part of the story.
Yeah.
And I want to ask you, Al, to tell it. But go ahead.
So when
No.
I was interpreting, it came out that my father had actually had a sham wedding. My mother was very very hurt, embarrassed that I was learning this now.
Right.
And so I did the best that I could to translate. Afterwards, we walked outside and we sat down, and she says, I'm sorry. She says, I never wanted you to know. And I said, it's okay. It's fine. I'm trying to make her. And she says, but, I just want you to know that I've always tried to make it better for you. And so
Definitely. Yeah.
I'm getting emotional again.
Amazing story.
Yeah, that was something, I would write a chapter, and I said, okay, I want you to read it now. I want you to say, I want you to think, and when she got emotional or choked up, then I realized that I caught the essence of that event.
Of
that
course.
happened. So that was kind of, so I'm glad
Yeah.
she's,
And I read the book, and it makes a big difference. If I was doing this interview without reading the book, it would be totally different. But these words are powerful because of the context in which it happened. She's becoming a U.S. citizen. The dad has to be in the picture. That forced the mother to tell the whole story of how it happened. She learns it for the first time. I think I read that you hug and you did cry too.
Yes.
You cried with your mother.
Right.
You hug, and then that's where these words were uttered to you. Better than me. Yeah. So let's start. One of the things that is also very amazing is that not having a father figure, and literally not having a grandma and a mother who were necessarily academically educated, that did not, in other words, Veronica's experience was not affected by that. She was just an amazing young girl who is pursuing and running the obstacles, whatever came her way. She just jumped them over. And can you begin, Al, to tell us that side of the story about her, how amazing her experience is, from childhood and then as she's coming of age?
Yes. I always try to break down this book into just a few words. And I've been able to do it, but it doesn't give it justice because there's so many parts to this.
Right.
Her, there in Santa Ana, and then her time there in Rocky Point, and even though she lived there for 6 years, she feels like it was a lifetime. She learned so much during that time. And then from there, she moved to Lukeville. And Lukeville, she was there, till she graduated from high school.
Right.
And so, she met so many challenges along the way, especially like in Mexico, being so poor. Many of her friends wanted her to come to her house, and she would visit. And meanwhile, she was afraid to have them come to her house because they were so poor.
They don't have anything. The friends had more, right? But they loved you and they wanted you to be there, right?
Right.
Yes.
I remember reading that.
Yeah, I mean, her sister Lily she told me, like, I remember looking through the walls and I could see the cars coming down the road, and Veronica would say, "Yeah, I remember in the house, it was always windy." And that was just because, it was just,
Through the wind, through the cracks on the wall.
Yes, and so, while she was there, she was part of the marathon dance, her Doña Caro telling stories of ghost stories, I mean, it kept on building up. But when she got to Lukeville, it was completely changed because she had to, learn a new language and assimilate.
Right.
And,
So they moved from Puerto Peñasco to Lukeville, and for those that might not know, Lukeville is a
Right, on the
border.
border.
It's a border.
Right.
In 45 minutes, I think you hit Puerto Peñasco.
It's an hour away.
An hour?
About 60 miles from
Yeah,
Rocky Point.
and then from Lukeville, if you
To
come
Ajo.
towards Phoenix, you would hit Ajo,
Ajo,
and then there's
right.
Y, right?
Well, the Y is right. It's north of the National Monument
Got it.
Park.
Got it.
And so the Y it's called the Y because it basically splits, Highway 83 or Highway 84, 85 and 84. One goes to Tucson, the other one comes to Phoenix.
So that's your high school experience
yes.
right there, right?
It was wonderful.
Have you gone back?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I love Ajo. I didn't necessarily grow up in that town, but we rode the bus every day. All the kids from Lukeville, Oregon Pipe National Monument, the Y, they would pick us up and we go to Ajo. So we were part of,
Right.
activities, and we were very active, a lot of us that lived in Lukeville.
Right.
And I love that town. I love the people of Ajo. They're so welcoming, so warm.
You
I
have
love
an
it.
experience about bullying, somebody bullying you,
Yes.
the speech, the dancing.
Yeah.
We'll get to that, and time we probably will run out of time, but we'll do our best. Stay with us. We're going to take our last break. You're listening to AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you for staying with us. This is AARP, Arizona Hispanic Connection. We have just a few more minutes, and we want to get to a few more points about this book. This is an amazing story. I mean, I really hope that... Oh, by the way, where can they get this book, Ali, if people want to buy it?
Well, you can get it on Amazon, Better Than Me, and my author name is Author Al Quihuis, and so you can order it there. But if you like an autographed copy from Veronica and myself, we're on Facebook, or we have a website with the same name, Author Al Quihuis. But just send us a message on Facebook, and we'd be happy to get one out to you.
Thank you. Al, help me to bring forth some of the points about the experience of Veronica in high school. Let's just talk about the bully one. Can you relate let's make it quick. So let's throw some points at her and then have her explain them, but briefly because of the time.
Sure.
The bully experience.
The bully experience happened in 4th grade, which was my first year in school, and I was barely learning the language. So I started school in August. By December, I could speak English, but I had a very heavy, thick accent. And so it never fails. There was a kid in our classroom he was the class bully, and he would make fun of me every time that I said something. He would make fun of me. He would laugh at me, and of course, all the other kids would follow suit. And so one day, I finally had enough, and I thought I have to deal with him. And I waited for him to go. It was after recess. It was after recess. Everyone was coming back inside the room, and I stood on one of the chairs. I took the chair from my teacher's desk, and I stood on it, and I waited for him to come in. And while he walked in, I jumped on his back, and I just started pounding on his back and scratching him and pulling his hair. And he's turning around, trying to get me off his back, and I'm like a little fly on the back on his back. And of course, the teacher, I could tell the teacher was amused. He was trying not to laugh, and all the kids are going crazy in the classroom. And finally, the teacher says, I have to paddle you. So I got my first paddle the very first year I was in school.
And that was the end of it. He never did it again.
He never did it again to me or anybody else. And I had a lot of students come to me and say, I'm so glad you did that, because he bullies us too. So it never happened again.
The ditching, you ditched once, right?
Yes, I ditched with another friend when we were in 8th grade. I went to 6th grade, and then from 6th, I skipped 7th grade. They put me in 8th grade because they had put me a year behind so that I could learn the language. So now I was with all new students again. I had to, meet all these new people. And, so my friend and I, who were both we excelled academically. She was from Morgan Pipe, and I was from Lukeville. We rode the bus, and we decided to ditch with a bunch of other friends. And we thought it would be easy to just come back in the afternoon and get on the bus. But my sister and her mother were waiting for us, so we came back. So my mother actually had me call the principal when I got home. And we had to go to a payphone to do that. Call the principal and tell him I apologized. And he said, "Okay, Veronica, I'll talk to you tomorrow." And so the next day I had to go in and see Principal Mr. Peterson at the time. And he just basically, he said something to me that really stuck. And he says, you have so much going for yourself. You're hanging out with the wrong crowd. You really need to think about what you want to do here, because your grades are wonderful. You've done so good in the 4 years you've been here in this school, and you need to select your friends better.
I noticed that you took that to heart. That was very, very something that you realized that.
Yes.
And even you use the dicho in here.
Yes.
Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres.
Yeah, tell me who you hang out with, and I'll tell you who you are. And
so that you took to heart, and you really
And my grandmother used that a lot. My mother used that a lot. And so that really did. And when you say you're lacking that male figure, to me, he was the principal, and I had to listen to him. And so that made an impression. And from there on, we're
going to run out of time. I know that. So let me stay with you, and then we'll come back to some of the other books that you have, Al, and then your desire to continue to write more books. Even I believe you are asking for stories that you want people. So we'll come back to you. But just one more time, I thought it was an amazing thing that you got selected to deliver what do you call it? The class speech?
The class speech, the graduation speech. There were like 3 or 4 of us that spoke, but I was one of the ones selected. And, my graduation speech was obviously, to me, it was an amazing. My mother was so proud, even though she didn't understand a word that I was saying. But I was up there sharing the stage with all those, wonderful teachers that we had, and Barry Goldwater, who was our keynote speaker at the time. And I talked to the class. I basically saying, this is a new beginning. This is it. Now from here on, it's whatever we make of our future.
Right.
So
Yeah, just to come back to Al, can you tell the audience what you did basically after high school in terms of school, career, etc.?
yes, I did. I went to ASU. I attended ASU. I did get married when I was young and fairly young, and moved. I lived in Canada for 7 years, and when I came back from Canada, I continued my education, and I ended up getting my master's degree when I was 38 years old. So it's never too late.
From ASU as well?
No, I finished at the University of Phoenix.
And just jobs, what industry did you work in?
I ended up getting into the healthcare industry just by a fluke. I needed a job when I came here from British Columbia, and a friend was in the industry, got in, and I ended up actually buying my own company, which it was a home care company. I owned that for a few years, sold that. I went on to be executive directors of retirement communities. So most of my 28 years of experience was in the senior healthcare industry, doing very well. And now I'm in insurance, working as an
Great,
insurance.
thank you. Al, just in the 2-3 minutes that we have left, before we get into other books that you have, and just tell us one more time the essence of this book. What is the essence? What is it that is conveyed here again? Just briefly.
Yes, I just think that the most important thing here is about following your dream and never giving up. And the best way to do that is through an education. And so I really encourage young people to always, have high goals, to do your best, go as high as you can, and never give up, believe in yourself, and help others. Those are the kind of things that are really important. As far as my future projects that I'm working on right now, I'm working on, actually, if anyone has any stories about their family coming here because of the revolution, please let me know. I'd love to hear these stories. I'm writing them down and putting together a book about all the different challenges that people had coming here. So I think that's very important. Also, I wanted to say that this book, Better Than Me, we encourage a lot of people to tell their family story. And the couple of people I'm working with are using this book as a guideline. So not only is it a very entertaining, inspiring book, it can also be a book that we use to help tell your family story, and which is so important because I think as far as a community, as far as a culture, that's something that historically we are a neglected and ignored group, and it's so important that we learn to tell our stories.
Can you elaborate just a little bit more? I don't know. You sent me that quote about we might not the neglected story piece. Do you have it? If you can read that piece, I think it's great.
Although the Mexican American is not the most deprived or the most oppressed minority in the United States, nevertheless, he is the most historically neglected and ignored group. And that was by Manuel Serving, the Mexican American, in awakening minority.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. It's very amazing. Even in, I mean, if we do not know the history, then you're pretty much in limbo. You don't know who you are, and it's so critical. So you are saying, and I was relating to both of you, that I've been doing videos, interviews. I have an external hard drive packed with videos that I've done over the years of people that are relatives and people that are not relatives, people that knew the history of, say, my town in Nayarit. So I'm documenting my own history, and at some point, hopefully, when I retire, I'll have a big project to do. But you're saying that you really recommend people to write their stories, their history, that correct? Exactly. Because eventually, and then there's another paragraph that you sent me that when you're young, you don't want to hear anything, but when you get older, you wish that you heard and that you write it and that you have written it, correct?
What your grandparents, wanted to share with you about their family's history, the sacrifices that they had.
Yeah. So new books. No, can you tell us just a little bit about this children's book?
Yeah,
I think it's
real
important.
Quick, I have written a series of children's book, Sophia and Pepe Adventure Series.
What is it called again?
Sophia and Pepe.
Sophia and Pepe's?
The Parrot.
Okay.
Pepe the Parrot Adventure Series. And I have 5 books that I've written. I know we're running out of time, but I will be at the Arizona Heritage Center at Papago Park this summer. from June through July, reading each of my stories. And so it's on a Tuesday. It's at 10 o'clock or 10:30. And so we do a reading. Then afterwards they have like treats, and they also have a creative project. It's a great place for kids to learn about their culture, their traditions, and being proud of their heritage. So if you want more information, contact us or David, but also you can get online and at the Arizona Heritage Center to get the information.
Yeah. Just final words, Veronica. Just any words that you want to convey to the public, I mean, about the book, about the experience, about your convictions, and just briefly.
I am extremely proud of the project here, the end result that Al created in this book. It really captured, like you said, the essence of my grandmother, my mother, and myself. You know, I think reading the book as he was writing it, I got to learn a lot more about myself as well. And Al is right. I think we want to promote, and I've always been a big promoter of continuing education. You know, just that is what's going to make a difference in most people's lives, is to continue to learn and to continue to better themselves, and just, you know, be open.
Even if someone has a bad experience, it can change
Absolutely.
in one generation.
Absolutely.
It can change in the
Yes,
by the second generation.
you don't have to carry exactly
Right.
what other
It
people.
will change.
It will change,
And
and it can be
education
for
is-
better.
is
And
the-
education is
the
the key.
key.
Correct.
Last point for you, Al, the universal story. I mean, there seems to be universal for parents to give their whole energy, life for their children, so that para que les vaya mejor, right?
That's right.
Is that the message here?
Oh, of course, definitely. Better than me.
Better than
So
me.
we focus on our timeline. We focus on the title, the cover, and that's what came out over and over again. You know,
Yeah.
bettering your children's lives.
Thank you, Veronica. Thank you,
you.
Al, and thank you for listening today. This is all the time for now. We have for now. So thank you. Join again Facebook and share the show, and see you next week. Have a great day.